Okay, so as I said, we're the remainder of Perek Chamishi, we're going to go fairly quickly. 6, 7, 8. You'll remember the 8 levels of Chesed. And number 6 that we looked at yesterday was Esek Hachai Im Hames, to take care of the dead. And obviously that's a tremendous Chesed. That's why a Chevra Kadisha is called Gemilus Chasodim Shel Emes. Right? You'll see an abbreviation, Gimel. So I'll teach you a Rashi Teva. Gimel Ches Shin Aleph. You'll say Chevra Kadisha Gimel Shin Ches Aleph, which is Gemilus Chasodim Shel Emes. And hopefully you remember the makor for that. The makor for that is a Rashi, which is really a Chazal, that when Yaakov requested, do not bury me in Mitzrayim, but bring me back to Eretz Yisrael, Yaakov Avinu's lashon was, you shall do for me chesed v'emes, al na tikbareni b'Mitzrayim, do not bury me in Egypt. And Rashi explains the chesed that we do with a dead person is a real chesed. It's a true chesed. That's what chesed v'emes, because there is no hope of getting any reward, so to speak, from the person that you're doing the chesed to. So again, ein mikra yotzim de pshuto, and even in the Talmud Devorah, obviously, this is the chesed that you do for the meis mamish, but in terms of your kavanah, you want to bring the sfiros alive. Now, number 7 is hachnasas kala l'chuppah. So I just want to digress for a moment. Halvoya sameis and achnasas kala l'chuppah are often juxtaposed. In fact, in the davening, which is Eilu Dvarim Adam Achal Perasam, it says Lavaya sameis achnasas kala. That is not because getting married is like being buried in the ground. No, that's not the reason. Of course, I better not say that that's the reason, or I'll get in big trouble. But it's not the reason. But both of them are considered to be great chasodim. So I want to mention the Gemara in Megillah combines the two. It says, Mevatlin Talmid Torah, Lachnasas Kala, Ulavoya Sames. We are commanded to be Mevatel Torah, to discontinue our share, to be Mevatel Torah for Hachnasas Kala, to escort a Kala to the chuppah, and Lavoya Sames, and for Levaya. So the two are combined for Mevatlin Talmid Torah. The Gra, I think I may have mentioned this, the Gra has a Gavaldiga Remez to this halacha. The Gemara doesn't give any pasuk for it. It just says in Svara, these are such important things that they override Limud HaTorah and they allow Bittul Torah. They compel Bittul Torah. So the Gra says there's a Gavaldiga Remez. In a very famous passage in Keheles, Shlomo HaMelech's meditation about life. So, Eis, right, Lakol Zman, everything has a time. Eis L'chol Chayfetz Tachas HaShemayim, very, very famous. Even in English, it's very famous. Everything has a time for war, a time for peace, a time for togetherness, a time for separation. It mentions all the different things in life, that everything has a place, everything has a time, everything has a justification. There's a time for everything. So most of the words are prefaced with a lamed, eis lasot, or eis la something, eis la something. But there are 2 of them, actually there's more than 2, but the graph focuses that 2 of them don't have a lamed. It says eis sephod, a time to eulogize, eis rekod, a time to dance. Now, it could have said grammatically, a lamed fits perfectly well. It could have said ace lispod, the ace lirkod. Right? The preposition to, to, certainly fits there. So why does it leave out the lamed in sephod and rekod? So the Gra says sephod, which is eulogy, corresponds to Lavoyat Hamet. Rekod, which is dancing, corresponds to a chasna. And for these two activities, there is no lamed, which means no limud, no learning. These two activities are without the lamed, without the learning. This is the makar, the Gra said. I'm sure it's the makar, but at least it's an asmachta, an after the fact allusion, that these are the two activities that you're mevatlin Talmud Torah for. Okay, it's a very, very nice remes. The question becomes, and again, I think I talked about this, just to mention very quickly, what does that mean? Does that mean I have to go, or you have to go to every chasna? I mean, if you went to every chasna, I don't mean every chasna, I mean, but you're not invited or whatever it would be. But even among your Chavri Yeshiva, right? You go to every chasna. So every levaya in a big city, there are going to be levayas, unfortunately, every day. So the Netziv writes, the Netziv is very machmer. Of course, the Netziv, you could accuse him of having a bias because he was Rosh Yeshiva Volozhin, so of course he'll be very strict on this. But the Netziv actually writes that the halacha that you're mevatel Torah l'havaya sameis achnesas kala simply means if a funeral is passing by your window, you get up and you escort the mace 4 amos, and then you go back to your learning. That's what it means to be mevatel l'havaya sameis. And if it doesn't pass mamash in front of you, there's b'chlal no chiyuv to go, and then it may not even be proper to be mevatel Talmud Torah. Hachnasas kala, same thing. Hachnasas kala means if there's a wedding, it's nothing to do with me being invited. If there's a wedding procession that's kind of passing by me, so I should stop my learning and be mishtatef a little bit 4 amos with the wedding procession. Which means in the Netziv Tainas, there's bichlal no heter per se to go to an out-of-town wedding or even an in-town wedding if it's not mamish in front of you. Same thing with the levaya. So the Netziv is very, very machmer, and many people who learn the Gemara don't understand the Gemara in such a narrow way. But the question is, if you go with the Netziv, so wait a second, so does that mean the other way around? I'm not allowed to ever go to any chasna if I'm going to be mevatel Torah? So here, the answer is this. You got to invoke another rule, meaning the rule of mevatlin Talmud Torah lachnasas kala. That rule is a very, very limited rule that only applies if it's right in front of you. So what's my heter to go to Beit Shemesh for a chasna? That's a separate rule. There's another basis to be mevatel Torah, which is not al lachnasas kala, but it's called a mitzvah she'i efsher laseis al yedei acherim. That means if I'm learning Torah and there's a mitzvah that cannot be done without me, meaning somebody else cannot take my place, then in such a situation I'm mevatel Torah. Right? So an example would be, let's say somebody needs to go to the hospital. I don't mean pikuach nefesh, but somebody needs to be taken to a doctor or whatever it would be. But it's in the middle of my night seder. So, again, I don't mean pikuach nefesh at all, but I mean, the guy needs a favor, the guy needs a ride. You happen to have a car. So it depends. If there are other people who are not learning, then l'chatchila they should take the person, right? On the other hand, if you're the only one, then you're mevatel Torah. Now, the trick here is, what does it mean you're the only one? Meaning, obviously, in a case where you're the only one with a car, for sure, you're the only one. But the only one also has a certain psychological component, and this is where it gets tricky. And that is, if your relationship is such that the person would feel betrayed, the person would be hurt, the person would be humiliated unless you take him, then in a sense that becomes a mitzvah that cannot be done by anybody else. Even though the mitzvah of physical driving might be done by somebody else, but if the person is going to feel that they don't count, that becomes a mitzvah that only you can do, right? So that's now again, that's a kind of a subjective judgment, but that's what halacha takes into account. Halacha takes into account your importance to the psychological and emotional welfare. Now, the truth of the matter is, that's exactly how you analyze chasnas. And that is, if my presence or my absence would result in that person being hurt, and that person feeling shunned, and that person feeling that, you don't care about him that much, then even if there are going to be plenty of other people at the chasna, your presence becomes something which is nobody else can make up. Masha ein kain, if you're just another face in the crowd, so to speak, then if it passes right by you, you should be mishtateh for a short amount of time, but it doesn't mean like you go to every wedding all the time. So I'm not sure if this gives very specific guidance, but it does mean that the concept of being mevatel Torah to go to a chasna is not a davar hefker. It's not just, oh sure, chasna, anytime, any chasna, any bris, any pidyon haben, somebody asked Rebbe, a mitzvah that's got a little popular in recent years in Yerushalayim is a very obscure mitzvah. It's the mitzvah of redeeming a firstborn donkey. The Torah talks about pidyon peter chamor, right? If there's a firstborn donkey, it has a certain kedusha, and you redeem it by giving a sheep to the Kohen. Now, this hasn't been done that much. Not that many Jews own donkeys. And the minhag anyway is if you're a farmer, we want to avoid problems of bechor. So what we do is we sell the mother when she's pregnant, we sell the ear to a guy. And the halacha is that any animal which is a partnership between a Jew and a guy, even if the guy only owns the ear, there's no kedushas bechorah. So the general practice is we avoid kedushas bechorah. First of all, if it's a sheep or a goat, you must do that, because otherwise you're stuck with a korban. See, a donkey is a different situation. The donkey does not have kedushas korban, of course, and even the sheep that you redeem the donkey on does not have kedusha. It's chulin. So there's no disadvantage, so to speak, in following the ceremony. But when you're talking about, you have a sheep or a goat, you very, very, very much want to avoid having kedushas bechor, because if your sheep gives birth to a firstborn lamb, a male lamb, that has the status of a korban. What can you do with it? Now, if it gets a mum, you can give it to a kohen and he shechs it, but you're not allowed to make a mum in the animal. So you're stuck. You can't shear the animal. You can't work the animal. You can't do anything with the animal. So what you're allowed to do is you're allowed to scatter barbed wire in the area so the animal will scratch itself and maybe create a mum. Even that's an issue of tzar balei chayim and the like. So when it comes to a sheep, a goat, a cow, for sure you're mechayiv to sell the ear to a goy, otherwise you have problems. And sometimes there are problems. There are balei tshuva that owned livestock that actually face this problem. It's a real shaila. Now, with the case of a donkey, that's not a big deal, because if I have a firstborn donkey, so I give the sheep to a kohen, and the sheep is not kadosh. It's chulin, and he can get it shechted, he can give it to tzedakah, all of these different things. But still, it was not the minhag of Klal Yisrael to do it. But in recent years, people do it. And in fact, I saw a ceremony. I mean, to me, I wouldn't have thought it was covered of a beis medrash, but I actually saw a video of this thing being done in a beis medrash. They brought a donkey in to the beis medrash, and they brought a sheep in, and they did the ceremony. Donkey's very cute. It's a 30-day-old donkey. It's a little thing. It's not a big thing. And it was wearing like a fancy blanket. They adorned it and everything. It was a little crazy. Anyway, so I'm bringing this up because somebody asked Rev Yoshev, is it mutter to be mevatel my learning seder to participate in pidyon peter chamor? So he describes it. Rabbi Yosef just stared at him. He didn't even answer. We love ceremonies, so we like to go to this ceremony and that ceremony. But to be mevatel Talmud Torah is a serious thing. And even when it comes to a chasana, you got to think about, Now again, the truth of the matter is, I've heard it said that in a yeshiva like Or Sameach especially, we're all family, etc. So for a chaver not to go is like a brother not going. Okay, again, if that's the situation, that is the situation. I'm not questioning it. But all it means is one should not have a kalus reish, that, every type of thing with this and that and that and that and that, take off for this, take off for that, take off for that. It's a serious thing. And when people quote the Gemara, remember that it's Siv. that Gemara is only when it literally passes before you. Otherwise, you got to subsume it under the rubric of mitzvah she'i afsher la'asaisa al yedei acherim, which is a different principle. Rav Kamenetsky once made a joke, a bit of a sad joke. He says he understands now the meaning of the Chazal. Ein ben chorin elamish isek b'Torah, right? The famous Chazal. No one is free. The only person who is free is a person who learns Torah. Right? Torah gives you freedom. So he says, now he understands it. If you had a job, you couldn't take off for every wedding that comes down the pike. It would have to be a special occasion. But when you're learning, you can take off for everything. He says, only a person who's learning has a totally free schedule. Again, that's not the way it should be, but Lamai said often is the way it is. So remember the juxtaposition of even Levaya is that way. Even something like, this is already a difficult question, Levaya of a Gadol. Levaya of a Gadol. It's not so pashut that you're Mavatal Torah for that, but still there we say that's an union of Kavod HaTorah. Kavod HaTorah inspires you to do Limud HaTorah, so there we do say it's Kedai to go, but even then, if it's Mamish out of town, it would take hours to get there. Not at all so pashut, yeah.
Would Pidyon Peter Chamor, in this case, because it's so rare, be considered Talmud Torah because you're watching it be done?
It might be because just to see what is done, so that's a chelik of limud. Chalitza might be very similar. Another thing that's rare, not as rare as Pidyon Peter Chamor, is chalitza. Right, a man dies without children. So the Torah says there's a mitzvah on the brother to either marry the widow, or if either of them doesn't want, she takes off his shoes, spits in front of him, and says, so shall be done to the man. Now, even though the Torah clearly envisions that yibum is the best option, and only if they don't want do they do chalitza, l'maisa the Ramah Paskins b'zman hazeh Ashkenazim do not practice yibum. So even if they would both want yibum, we actually don't allow it to happen. And we only do chalitza. But chalitza is fairly rare. It only applies if there are no children and there's a brother. So when the chalitzas are done, a lot of times a big crowd will be attracted. So I remember in Baltimore, there was going to be a chalitza, and literally 500 people crowded into a shul to see the chalitza. It was a very, very strange story because the woman was not religious, and she was married to a husband that was not religious. The husband's brother, became a Baal Tshuva who lived in Bnei Brak, and he was the one who was pushing chalitza. She didn't care, she didn't care at all, but she'll do him a favor. And she was told, it's a 5-minute ceremony. Go to the rabbi's office, in and out. You'll be out in 10 minutes. Just do your brother-in-law a favor. So I still remember, and to this day, I am a little ashamed. I was one of the 500 people. She walks in. You could see, she was totally, devastated. She thought it was a 10-minute thing, in and out. She walks in, and 500 people are staring at her. So they kind of rushed her into a private office for a while to compose. But, she wasn't expecting a big crowd, but people want to do it because they want to see how a chalitza is done. Truth of the matter is, I didn't gain anything from it. I couldn't see how the chalitza was done because I couldn't see anything. So it didn't even help. But still, that would be an example where theoretically you want to learn something. Going to a slaughterhouse would be another example. How do you do shechita? Even if you learn the Shulchan Aruch, if you don't see it done, you don't really understand it. And certainly trephos, which is intimately bound up with the anatomy of an animal, you have to sit over pieces of lung and heart and everything else to understand it. So there's no question that that's a chelik of Talmud Torah. That's an essential chelik of Talmud Torah, particularly if you want to paskin a get See how a get is written, right? So you're correct. There are inyanim of Talmud Torah there. Okay. But be it as it may, number 6 is Esek Achayim Ames, which we looked at. And number 7 is Hachnasas Kalo L'chuppah. Again, it's a great chesed. In terms of Sfiros, though, it's a fairly simple idea, because the entire imagery of the Sfiros is based on a sexual union between Yesod and Malchus, right? Remember, Malchus is the feminine, Yesod is the recipient of all of the spiritual kochos of Chesed and Gevurah and Tiferes, and therefore, Hachnasas Kala L'chuppah is simply, again, this duplicated other chasadim, is simply a way of bringing Yesod and Malchus together, because Malchus is the Kala. Malchus is the Kala, and you are bringing them together. Now here, though, it's interesting. He doesn't explain why. Remember, when we talked about tzedakah, right, we also said that tzedakah is also a unification. So keep in mind, see how these things repeat? In the 4th level, giving tzedakah li'aniyim is also unifying Yesod and Malchus, because they're called aniyim, because mitzad themselves they're empty. Malchus has nothing. Yesod is also just a recipient of the other spheros. So giving tzedakah was a tikkun and a unification of Yesod and Malchus, who are called aniyim. See, everything has multiple names here. Now, you'll then recall that the particular form of tzedakah is not only the tzedakah, but it's the 90, right, tzedakah, 90 amens, 4 kedushas, 100 brachos, and passages from the Chamisha Chumshei Torah. So here, this is almost a mirror image. If Yesod and Malchus are called aniyim, Yesod and Malchus are also called chasan v'kala. Yesod is the chasan, Malchus is the kala. Hachnasas kala is when you bring Yesod together with Malchus. So here they have a different identity. We're not sophisticated enough to know exactly the different nuance. Here it's not a question of tzedakah li'aniyim. Here the yichud is described as hachnasas kala. And if the tzedakah li'aniyim of level 4 was the amens and the kedushas and the brachos and the chamisha chumshei Torah, here he says the ikar that affects hachnasas kala is tefillah. Tefillah is the mechanism by which you bring the chasan and the kala together. And here he's very much makatzer. He doesn't elaborate on it, but he talks about everything in terms of ascending levels. We have what he calls korbanos, which are, the korbanos, Parsha Satamid, and the like. Then we have what is called, he has interesting names here. Second level is zemiros. By zemiros, he means what we call Pesuke de Zimra. Third level, again, this is a very unusual phrase, he calls it Tefillah Miyushav, the sitting down davening, which is Kriya Shema and the brachos. And the 4th level is called Tefillah Ma'umad, the standing tefillah. And then he says, Shar Tikunim Habaim Achareim, along with the other rectifications that follow the Tefillah Ma'umad. That would be Ashrei, Uval Tzion, Aleinu, and the like. Now, he doesn't really explain how this happens, but it's very, very clear that what he says is that through these different gradations in tefillah, you are being machnis the kala to the chuppah, you are bringing Yesod together with Malchus, which will ultimately bring the shefa and the light of God into the world. Now, the Mekubalim were very, very makbid. I mean, halacha is not necessarily so makbid on the order of things. For example, if you wanted to say Ashrei Uval Tzion at the very beginning of davening, and that way you would just finish with Shmon Esrei and Tachanan because you already said Ashrei Uval Tzion and even Aleinu and Hayom. So Mi'ikar Adin, that's good. I mean, you're mechuyev to say Ashrei 3 times a day, but you could say it when you say it. It doesn't have to be a hakpada that you got to follow the order. Yeah, once you get to Birchas Kriya Shema and Shema, there's an order there. But in terms of korbanos and in terms of the stuff after Tachanan, the Seder is not ma'akiv. If you wanted to say, no reason to do it this way, if I wanted to say Uval Tzion before Lam Natseach, or if I wanted to say Ashrei after Uval Tzion, halachically, there's no particular thing that's wrong with that. You're yotzei what your chiyuvim are. But in Kabbalah, it's very, very, very much not that way. In Kabbalah, there is a spiritual reason for the exact sequencing of things. And when things are out of sequence, you're not accomplishing the yichudim, the unifications, and the tikkunim, the rectifications, the clearing out the pipes that you need to accomplish. In fact, the Mekubalim were very, very against even skipping. We know there's a halacha that you can abbreviate Psukei de Zimra, if you have to, in order to make Tefillah B'tzibur. Now, Tefillah B'tzibur is Shmon Esrei. Let's assume that I daven slower than the minyan. So if I say a full Psukei de Zimra, what's going to happen is they're already going to be in Birchas Kriya Shema. And by the time they reach Shmona Esrei, either I'm in Birchas Kriya Shema, or maybe I'm still in Psukei de Zimra even. So what's going to happen is, if I daven at my pace, I'm not going to daven the Shmona Esrei with the tzibur. So I'm going to lose the merit, even if I answer Kedusha, which is good, but I lose the merit of davening my Amida with the tzibur. So because Tefillah b'tzibur is an important thing, so we allow a certain cut. You can abbreviate Psukei de Zimra, so you can skip ahead. The purpose, in other words, in order to make Tefillah b'tzibur. So there's a whole list exactly how you make the cut. Essentially, you do have to say Baruch She'amar, because that's a bracha for Psukei de Zimra. You have to say Yishtabach, because that is the after bracha of Psukei de Zimra, so they cannot be skipped. And then you have to say at least one psalm. And then there's priorities. Ashrei is the number one to say, and then the Halalukas, and even in the Halalukas, I don't want to go over the whole list, there are priorities. Vayivarech David and Oz Yashir, which are not Tehillim, are kind of towards the bottom of the priority list. If you have, in other words, keep on saying, if you have time, add this. If you have time, add this. If you have time, add this, right? So it keeps on adding, telling you what order do you add things in. Okay? But the Yesod HaDvorim is that Psukei de Zimra can be abbreviated in order to make Tefillah b'tzibur. And that's the halacha, right? The Mishnah Berurah talks about it, B'arichas, and gives you all sorts of priority lists. Nevertheless, the Mekubalim were very, very makbid. You can't skip because every single one has a unique function in the tikkunim. Now here, the Ramak doesn't tell me what it is, but I'll tell you the truth. The very fact that he kind of enumerates, you see that he's trying to express, there's korbanos, and then there's zemiros, and then the tefillah miyushav, and then tefillah de miomad, and then shar tikkunim abba machareim. The fact that he's expressing it that way and doesn't just say tefillah, but he spells everything out, this is the hashkafa of the Mekubalim, that each particular step in the particular order is necessary to accomplish those things. So what that would mean basically is that if you daven slow, you got to start early. You got to come early. You got to start early, meaning a Mekubal would say, don't skip anything. But in order to make Tefillah B'tzibur, you got to start early. And if that means, and by the way, there's nothing wrong with starting Yishtabach early, meaning I can stoop Sukkot Zimra, and if I'm finished by the time they're still in Sukkot Zimra, I can do Yishtabach and say Kriyas Shema and the Brachos slowly, and then I start Shmon Esrei with them. In other words, my only chiyuv to try to coordinate with the minyan is Shmon Esrei itself. Anything else, I can go ahead. I can go at my own pace. The goal is I want to start Shemona Esrei with 9 other people. Okay, that's your goal. So you don't have to say Birchos Kriya Shema B'tzibur. It's only the Shemona Esrei that you say B'tzibur. Yeah.
Could you start Shema before everyone else, but then when the chazan says Baruch Hu, then you just respond to Baruch Hu?
That's correct. Then you just respond. In other words, you start Shema, you can start Shema before everybody else. And sometimes that's very advisable, because if you say Kriya Shema slowly, you don't want to start Shema with them, because then you'll miss Tefillah B'tzibur. So you start Shema before them. Yeah.
Why do people say Yishtabach with the chazan?
When you say with the chazan, meaning they wait, you mean?
Everyone waits, and then the chazan says Yishtabach, and everyone says Yishtabach with him.
No particular reason. No particular reason. Anyway, the Yishtabach is shver anyway. I mean, why? I don't even know why the chazan begins from Yishtabach. I mean, Yishtabach is not a beginning of a section of davening. Yishtabach is the bracha acharona of Psukei de Zimra. After Yishtabach, we begin a new section called Birchas Kriya Shema, which is Yotzer Or V'Orichoshech. So why a chazan starts from Yishtabach like it's a new thing? I mean, you get the impression Yishtabach is a new thing. Yishtabach is not a new thing. Yishtabach is the conclusion of Psukei de Zimra. So it seems to me that when you finish Psukei de Zimra, you should say Yishtabach right away. There's not even a reason to it. And then you wait. If you're going to daven Birchas Kriya Shema with the tzibur, if you don't need to go ahead, then you wait for that. Okay? So that's the idea of Psukei de Zimra. Now, what is it? What does the words in section? I'll tell you another word from the Mekubalim, from the Arizal. Psukei de Zimra. Psukei, that's not hard to translate. Verses of. Okay? What is Zimra? So the simple meaning, of course, is Zimra means song, Zemiros, mainly Tehillim. Tehillim is called Zemiros, Mizmor LeDavid, a song of David. David HaMelech himself is called, famous name, Ne'im Zemiros Yisrael, the sweet singer, Zemiros, singer of songs for Klal Yisrael. So that's the simple understanding. Psukei de Zimra are the verses of song, poetic song to God. But the Arizal says that Lizamer in Chumash does not only mean to sing, it means to prune. Prune is to cut off branches. Remember by Shemitah, when the Torah gives you the laws that you're not allowed to do on Shemitah, so it says you're not allowed to do things that cause or facilitate growth of plants. So it mentions, Karmacha lo tizmor. Do not prune your vineyard. What is pruning? Pruning is when you cut off surplus branches, which could take sap or other nutrients and disperse them over too large an area. So you cut off a lot of the branches so the sap will be concentrated in a few places. So to be zomer is to cut off branches in order to facilitate growth. Interesting shaila. If you're zomer, either a tree or a vine on Shabbos, what malacha are you over on when you cut branches off a vine or off a tree? So listen to what the Gemara says. Very, very logical Gemara. The Gemara says, if you're cutting the branches because you want to use the branches, the malacha you committed is harvesting. Because harvesting is when I harvest in order to use the crop. If I'm cutting the branches not because I want to use the branches, but I'm cutting the branches so the tree or the vine will grow better, that's zoreya. That is treated as a tolda of planting, because anything that facilitates growth, right? Zoreya is not only if you plant, if you water a garden. What's the malacha of watering grass or watering flowers on Shabbos? Zoreya, it causes growth, right? So zomer is also a tolda of zoreya. So if I have two motives, I'm cutting the branches so the tree will grow better and I want to use the branches, I'm chayav for two malachas. I'm chayav for zoreya and I'm chayav for kotzer. So based on the idea, this is what the Arizal says, based on the idea that zomer means to prune branches, psuke de zimra means these are the prayers that they cut away the makatrigim, they cut away the prosecuting angels. They bring mercy down from HaKadosh Baruch Hu by getting rid of all of the kochos of Tumah, the Satan, that tries to be ma'akiv our prayer. So Psuke de Zimra is seen as kind of getting rid of the bad forces so your prayers will be makubal by HaKadosh Baruch Hu in Shemayim. Again, whatever that process means exactly. And therefore it's a lashon of Zemira. Cut away the branches so your tefillas would ascend. Now the Ramak doesn't say it here. I don't recall what he says in the Pardesh Rimonim on this in particular. But if that's the function, then it makes sense why you need a complete thing, meaning a partial Psuke de Zimra would be like a partial pruning. Yeah, it's better than nothing, for sure, but you didn't complete the job. You still have those extra branches, and therefore there was a big Indian in Kabbalah to follow an order and to kind of say everything that needs to be said. Yeah.
Would the Makum recommend that one slightly rushes their Psuke de Zimra to make sure you say all of it?
Yeah, so then you get into a question. That actually is a very, very good question. So what's better? Better to say everything fast, or to say less, be somech on the skipping, but say it with more kavanah? Now, l'chayra, Chazal's directive, which is, lav dafka Kabbalistic, is tov ma'at b'kavana meharbe shelo b'kavana. This is a Beferish Mishnah. Better a little bit with kavana than a lot without kavana. Now, once again, you always have to know the applications. They are not talking about Psuke de Zimra in particular. This is a general directive. The question is, would you apply that Chazal here? I don't know. I think Lamaisa they would say that the Kavanah is still most important here. But ideally, you avoid the conflict by starting early. Now, by the Amida, we do have a very simple thing. Tefillah b'tzibur is measured by your beginning the Shmona Esrei with the minyan. So at that point, you can daven as slow as you want. If you want to daven for 2 hours, you still have tefillah b'tzibur. So in other words, you don't have to finish with them, or even finish with anybody in the minyan, as long as you're maschil with them. And again, there's a whole shiloh, what is maschil? Some say maschil means I'm mamish maschil, exactly. Some say I'm maschil when at least 9 people are still in the first bracha. And some even say I'm maschil if 9 people are within the first 3 brachas, because it's treated as one bracha. So even if you start a little after the minyan, you might still be nichlal in tefillah b'tzibur. But however you define it, you got to kind of start while they're in the beginning of the Amida. But that's only a requirement of beginning. You can finish, even 2 hours later, and that's not going to be a problem. But with Psuke de Zimra, you're going to have a problem that if I have to finish in order to make the minyan, so then you have the dilemma of kavana versus quantity, and I think the kavana would be more important. Yeah.
Is there anything that we're required to say with the seaboard?
I didn't hear you. Is what?
Is there anything that we're required to say with the seaboard? Because I think the only solution to the problem is you either have to start earlier than everybody else, or you either have to jump ahead. That way.
Yeah, well, that's right. That's exactly what you do. The only requirement of being with the tzibor is Shemona Esrei. That is it. And that's the beginning of Shemona Esrei. Now, it's true that if I skipped ahead and they're up to Shema, I'm supposed to say, if I'm allowed to interrupt, depending where I am, I'm supposed to say the first pasuk of Shema when they say it. Just like I answer Kedusha, I answer Yehei Shmei Rabbah. There are rules that I answer certain things at certain times, but I don't have to be at their pace. Absolutely not, except for the Amidah itself.
And you can repeat something you've already done, like so if you jump to ahead and did Shema, and then now they finally get to Shema, you can repeat Shema with them twice.
No, you don't repeat Shema. The first, that pasuk, the pasuk. Yeah, because saying Shema is Ki'ilu Yehei Shmei Rabbah. It's like an answer. And if you're in a place, by the way, that you're not allowed to interrupt, like you're in the middle of Kriya Shema when they're saying Shema Yisrael, you should put your hand over your eyes, meaning you don't, even if you don't say it, but you give the appearance as if you're saying it, so you show that you're not separating from the tzibur.
If you're still in the middle of Shemona Esrei and they're getting to Kaddish, for example, or they're getting to something that you have to answer to, is it better to keep going with what you're saying, or is it better to pause and have kavana that you're being guilty with the tzibur?
So you pause. You don't answer, right? There's nothing in Shemona Esrei that you ever answer to, but you pause at the place where you're supposed to answer.
Even if you're in the middle of a section?
Yeah, but you pause. Now, not for every Amen of Kaddish, but for Yehei Shmei Rabbah. Only for Yehei Shmei Rabbah. Okay, so be it as it may, so this is number 7, Hachnasas Kala L'chuppah. So it's interesting, again, and just in terms of structure, not that I can make a lot of sense of it totally. When it comes to Yesod and Malchus being Aniyim, you feed them by tzedakah. When it comes to Yesod and Malchus being characterized by Chasan and Kala, you feed them by Tefillah, or you help them by Tefillah. Right? So it's interesting how the same Sfiros and the same process, when they assume different names, are fed or nourished or brought together by different types of mitzvahs. And tefillah is what effects hachnasas kala. Okay, stop here.
Thank you for listening to this Awesome production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.